Hello everyone, welcome back to Adventures Through the Mind. I'm your host as always, James W. Jesso. For this episode, we are featuring a conversation with Robert Rio Hahn. Robert Rio Hahn is an explorer, photographer, and filmmaker, author, and speaker on the exploration of altered states of consciousness. He is popularly known by Rio, a name given to him during his Amazon explorations. Hahn has been elected a Fellow of the Explorers Club and a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. He served 2 terms on the International Board of the Explorers Club, Ombudsman, and 3 terms as chairman of the San Diego chapter. He is the recipient of 5 Explorers Club expedition flags, a licensed sea captain, an open water diver, a founding member of the International Society for Ethnopharmacology, and recipient of the title of High Chief of Western Samoa. Hahn's formal work in the field of psychedelics began when he served as scientific chief for the Institute of Ecotechnics Amazon Expedition, a 2-year ethnopharmacological expedition that ventured 2,200 miles up the Amazon River. Utilizing the research vessel Heraclitus, which was built by Hahn and his Ecotechnic associates in 1975. He equipped the vessel with a phytochemical laboratory for doing field chemical extractions of fresh plant material. His expedition mentors included Harvard professor Richard Evans Schultes, Sir Gillian Prance, Bo Homestead, and Laurent River, and expedition participants included Terence and Dennis McKenna and Wade Davis. Hahn's unprecedented work in the oral use of datura by Hindu swami swami, in Nepal led his friend and mentor Albert Hofmann to bestow on him the title of Dr. Psychedelica. Following the Amazon expedition, Hahn served as an expedition chief for the 3-year around-the-world expedition on board the RV Heraclitus, producing the cultural documentary film series Journeys to Other Worlds. In nearly 5 decades, Hahn and his associates have engaged in a number of innovative ecological projects on 5 continents. Hahn is a founding director, fellow, and past president of the Institute of Ecotechnics, whose research led to the Biosphere 2 project, which he co-initiated. So Hahn is on the show as an interesting sort of callback to a previous episode. I found out about Hahn through Greg Kaiser, who was on the episode to talk about super aware intelligent machines, systems thinking, and super systemic thinking. Greg was putting together a conference before conferences were really complicated to put together, and Rio was going to be there. And it was in reading the description of Rio's work, which is basically about the fundamental sort of importance of mindset in psychedelic journey work and the importance of having an explorer's mindset within that really caught me, because I'm really on board with that. I personally consider set to be the foundational aspect of what gives rise to our psychedelic journeys, wherein setting and dose really just support the set. So getting a chance to talk with him, I then realized that, well, not only do we share that perspective, and he has a very cool basis by which he presents his explorer's mindset for psychedelics, being literally an explorer himself, having gone expeditions where he sailed around the world and drank datura with Hindu swamis, and was even in the Amazon with Wade Davis, Terence, and Dennis McKenna during those early days of doing ethnopharmacological field work. So little did I realize that Rio is also a really important participant and part of the history of psychedelic culture as we know of it today, which is Western psychedelic anthropology and ethnopharmacology. So the interview that you're going to hear is a combination of talking about his work and his history and his sort of relationship to expedition and exploration, and interwoven in that is a discussion about the explorer's mindset and the value an explorer's mindset has for deep psychedelic journey work. This episode, if you can watch it in video, check it out. Rio had a bunch of awesome photos from his time down, literally sailing the world, but in particular his time down in the Amazon. And those photos are shown on the video to this episode, although he also describes step by step what those photos are, so you could just listen to an audio if you want. So that's it for the preamble. A big thank you to my patrons on Patreon who make this podcast possible, especially the people whose names are listed on the screen here on YouTube. I wouldn't be able to do this without you, and your continued financial input into the production of this show and the work that surrounds it has enabled me to continue to invest in it without essentially spiraling out into extreme economic stress as a consequence of the pandemic limiting all the other areas that I at one point was making money. So yeah, thank you for that. And also a huge thank you to both Andrew and wants to be known as, quote, a grateful psychonaut, because your recent PayPal donations have been very generous and deeply, deeply appreciated. So thank you. If you, the listener, are not yet a patron of the show, I would love for you to become one. Every little bit counts. And yeah, you could get more in a little bit if you want, but just becoming a patron would be fantastic. You can do so by heading to patreon.com/James W. Jesso. You could also leave a one-time PayPal donation, such as Andrew and a grateful psychonaut have done, and the link to do so is contained in the description to this episode. So thank you very much for contributing financially to the show. I really deeply appreciate it. If you can't contribute financially, contributing through pushing it out into your social spheres, be it through digital platform or not, also very much appreciated. So thank you for doing that. And I hope you enjoy this episode of Adventures Through the Mind with Robert Rio Hahn, episode 128. Great. So Robert Rio Hahn, welcome to Adventures Through the Mind.
Thank you. Great to be here, James.
So, the purpose of this podcast is to kind of explore this premise, this theory, this framework, this model that you have for the psychedelic experience, which is essentially a psychonautic, an explorer. Psychonautic in the sense of the importance of how set influences the experience and how valuable having an explorer's mindset can be. And this is something that you're going to share with us in detail, but it's something that emerges out of your life as a consequence of you very literally having been an explorer, someone who's gone on multiple expeditions. And so to get us set up for understanding your model for exploration, for the mindset of explorer insofar as psychedelic experience, I want to get, kind of get a sense of what that expedition history is. So essentially this is an opportunity. Let's set the stage for your thoughts on this by getting a sense of your history as an explorer and how that brought you into exploring psychedelic spaces.
Okay, I'm glad to do that. I'd go back to actually when I was a young boy. And this was documented in a book that came out a number of years ago called Adventurous Dreams, Adventurous Lives, which documented a number of us who are fellows of the Explorers Club. And so my exploration history began when my father took me at 9 years old on a 2-week canoe trip from Hudson Bay in Canada, in which we had myself, 2 other friends, 1 other father, and an Indian guide, and saw only 2 other people for 2 weeks. That sort of whet my appetite for it. Then at 15 to 16, I went off to Europe on my own with a small group of people. And then my major exploration work began actually in 1979, end of 79, 80, when Richard Evans Schultes, who was then director of the Harvard Botanical Museum, proposed to my associates and I at an Institute of Ecotechnics conference in Penang, Malaysia, that we take our ship, the Heraclitus, 2,000 miles up the Amazon and work in the area where he had taken the alpha helix from Scripps. And you can see here a picture of the Heraclitus sailing. It's a 3-masted ferrocement Chinese junk that we built and launched in 1975. Here you see a picture of it tied up in the bank in the Amazon outside of Iquitos, Peru. And then you also see it here tied up alongside on a small tributary. And we took down all of the sails. We turned them into a water collection, a rain collection system so that we had fresh water, because there are periods of time in the Amazon when you don't get fresh water. The main purpose of this expedition was to do ethnopharmacological field work with shaman of the Northwest Amazon. Here you see a picture of me collecting an Amazonian flower with one of my guides. And then a photograph here of me in the ship's laboratory that, with Boo Homestead and Laurent Rivier's advice, I set up. It's a complete phytochemical laboratory with a rotovapor setup in the traditional wet chemistry days. And then another photo here of me sitting on the grass in a Peruvian small village up a small tributary of the Amazon called the Rio Hahn, working with my bottles and doing extractions of fresh plant material in the field. And we were looking particularly at psychoactive plants. Here you see a photograph of me with a young shaman, and we're preparing Varola. And you can see running out of my mouth the coca, which we used to give us energy basically everywhere we went. It was fantastic. Your mouth gets a bit numb and you have tremendous energy from it. You can see me here sitting with a bunch of men and also a couple of boys. My mouth filled with coca, several of the others, as we're preparing for an all-night dance, which you can see me here dancing with the men and the women in the Malacca, which is a huge dancing tent. And each of us men has a stick that we went into the forest, trimmed the leaves off of, and we dance with that stick, pounding the ground with it. So by the end of the night, the end of my stick was pretty well broken. Then you can see a picture here of me on the deck of the Heraclitus with Nicole Maxwell, who's Shaman's Apprentice is the book she wrote, and she was one of the earliest women explorers in the Amazon. I was very lucky that she was there at this time. Then you see here a photo of a Quechua shaman blowing smoke onto the top of my head in the library of the Heraclitus and doing a chant over me. And then you see two pictures here of a shaman examining and treating me during my first ayahuasca experience. And I went to a shaman through a back street in Iquitos, dusty old back street. We went through into this tin building, and in the back, he had a small room with a single electric light, some women sitting there with their babies who had come for healing. And in the back was a small group of men doing ayahuasca, and he gave me a glass of ayahuasca. This is my first experience. That when I told the story later to the author William Burroughs, who had written the Yahe papers, he told me it was enough, in his opinion, to have killed me. And this ayahuasca experience was truly life transforming for me. I wrote about it in a book they called They Live to Tell the Tale, Modern Adventures of Members of the Explorers Club. And in this book, I have a chapter entitled Elixir of the Spirit. And one brief image from that experience was that when I threw up, I regurgitated the ayahuasca, as most people do, and Well, today we have brews that are not so hard on the stomach. At this time, they paid no attention to that. And I can tell you it was the vilest liquid I had ever drunk. And when I threw up, I saw coming out of my mouth liquid fire. And that liquid fire spread out on the ground and maintained its quality of liquid fire. So that gives you some idea of the intensity of my ayahuasca experience. Next, you see on my next major expedition,
Well, let's
which
pause. Let's pause here for a
sure,
second, Rio, because I want to go a little bit deeper. You mentioned a lot of names there that the
okay,
listeners may or may not be aware of. I assume Richard Evan Schultes is a common name for anyone who's been paying attention to the psychedelic, modern psychedelic cultural history, as he was one of the forefathers of journeying the Amazon and drinking the ayahuasca and so on and so forth. And this expedition you were on that brought you up into the Amazon was with him. But you now maybe this is the second expedition, but you had also gone on an expedition with some other sort of famous psychedelic ayahuasca people, which included Wade Davis and Terrence and Dennis McKenna as well. Was that the first expedition you were on that included Wade Davis and Terrence and Dennis McKenna?
yes, it was. And just one correction was Dr. Schultes never joined us in the Amazon, but he was a mentor. He introduced me to Wade, and when Wade was still a graduate student at Harvard. And so Wade joined the expedition, and Terrence McKenna and Dennis McKenna uh, also joined the expedition. And at that time, so this is all during the Amazon expedition. And they set out with two of our other collectors and did an expedition up a small tributary known as the Rio Hahn, which I went up also later. And that was, for many of us, the beginning of a long history now. Of course, Terrence and Dennis kept things alive, as we were talking the other day on a Zoom, as part of the Terrence McKenna memorial that's been going on online
Hmm.
from the McKenna Academy. And that was the basis from what Dennis did his PhD thesis and opened up for many, many people then the whole experience of ayahuasca, altered states of consciousness. And of course, that's now grown to be ayahuasca tourism today. But in those days, it was totally new and not something that many people did at all.
This brings up another question because it's not often that I get a chance to talk with somebody who drank ayahuasca in that context. Most people who drink it, these days are drinking it from at the very least a context of understanding what it is, and that many other people have drunk it. People like themselves, like people from the Western world. Whereas that was not the case when you were going in. It wasn't like I mean this metaphorically because the roads aren't all paved or whatever, but the roads weren't paved. So I'm just curious, like palpably, what was it like at that time to be in the jungle, and you're in the jungle on this expedition, and now there's this opportunity to drink this thing. Like, what was that like for you conceptually, from a standpoint of like, did you have experience with psychedelics in some sense or another before that? Was all of this brand new to you? What caused you to want to do it? I mean, I'm really just curious. Like, what was the lived experience like to be someone who drank ayahuasca as one of the first sets of people from the Western world who kind of who drank ayahuasca? I mean, there are other people, obviously. It wasn't just like two or three of you that had done it by any means, but there was a first wave of a smaller amount of people, and you were kind of part of one of those first waves before ayahuasca tourism or ayahuasca popularity or ayahuasca was even present in the meme sphere of the human mind, outside of very specialized cultures of people. So yeah, I mean, what was that like?
Well, I did have prior experience with psychedelics, which I started taking in college. Fortunately, I had an excellent set and setting. I was part of a small group who published a magazine called Penn Comment when I was going to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And we went out into the country, rented a cabin in beautiful forest area, and had a number of psychedelic experiences, psilocybin, acid, so on. And I found, again, I think this goes back to my explorer persona, if you will, but this mindset, again, set really means mindset, um, of an explorer. So I approached all of these things from that mindset. I was extremely curious. I was open to whatever was going to come. And so I had heard about ayahuasca. I knew that in the Amazon would be an opportunity. We were working there. My right hand woman, if you will, Robin Treadwell, who was the botanist, now passed away, and Franklin Ayala, who was head of the herbarium in Iquitos of the University of Lima at the time. And he said, well, I can take you to a shaman. And I was just very excited. I was young and here on my first major exploration, having taken actually almost a year setting up the Amazon expedition, going there on a reconnaissance trip, meeting the people that we worked with, and then, as I was describing a bit earlier, going into these back streets, which weren't paved, it was all dust at that time, of Iquitos. And I was somehow open, I was trusting. There was some very gut intuitive feeling, sense that, this was going to be okay. It was actually a moment that I had looked forward to for a long time. And then the experience was one of, during the experience, I remember kind of opening myself up and letting the rainforest come in, if you will. I had that communication, a sense of real communication in a deep, organic way. What some people talk about also as the telepathic communication that you can get during ayahuasca. And I felt that very strongly. I could see a jaguar moving across the area that we were sitting in the back. And also I felt in that moment a real empathy for the plight of the rainforest. When we had come down the Amazon from the mouth in the Brazil and made our way up to Peru, we passed areas where there were forest fires going on as they were beginning at that time the clear cutting of the Amazon, which of course today has reached enormous levels, threatening the very existence of the rainforest. But it had started already in those days. So I gave me a sense of what was going on with the rainforest, that the rainforest itself was a being, you could almost say. And I think that this mindset, again, of an explorer, which I came by maybe naturally, I'm not sure. As I said earlier, I was introduced to it very young, but I think it was a natural inclination, gave me a tool, though I wasn't at the time aware of it, but a tool with which to approach the psychedelic experience, the experience of an altered state of consciousness.
So, I mean, this is a slight eddy on our journey, like using a river metaphor on our journey through the Amazon here.
Right.
And it's not necessarily on track with sort of where we're going in the conversation, but it feels like really salient for me to ask this, which is that understanding the sort of like the context in which you were entering into this from a place of exploration and expedition and sort of like new worlds and new realities, and from a place of like a respectful curiosity for the indigenous ways of life, and and on all of these things, and then looking at where things are now. And also, I'm kind of like, I'm thinking about Jeremy Narby and him. Sometime last year, he wrote this thing about like confessions of being a white vampire or something like that, and these other things. And I'm wondering, when you look at what has come of I mean, maybe this is something to save for later, I don't know. But when you look at what has come of ayahuasca and ayahuasca tourism in Peru, and wondering about, what's called the paradox of tourism, which is like we like adventure seekers go out to these beautiful, pristine places, and that's what we're seeking. And yet when we find them, having found them lays the groundwork for them to be destroyed by others who end up also discovering through word of mouth where these places are, until market comes in and they become tourist places rather than having once been the pristine wild places we sought. So thinking about the paradox of tourism, and Jeremy Narby talking about being a white vampire, and this kind of stuff, looking at that, do you have any remorse or regret around having accidentally been one of the people who helped open the pathways to ayahuasca? I mean, also a lot of positive things have come of ayahuasca being a part of the world as well. So maybe there's the opposite of remorse or regret. But that's just a question that's really coming up for me right now that I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on.
Well, one of our first motivations for doing the Amazon expedition was because of the tremendous extinction of plant species that was occurring. Already, we were aware of it at that time, and of course that's only grown in scale. And so one of the purposes was to find and collect and preserve our knowledge of these plant species. As Dr. Schultes made the point in his talk at our Institute of Ecotechnics conference, that the rainforest is an emporium of chemicals, and most of them we don't know, and even to this day we don't fully know them. So there was the motivation to preserve these plants, and that was not just psychedelics, but medicinal plants in general is what we were focused on. The other motivation was to contribute, and that was part of it, to the Flora of Peru project being done by Missouri Botanical Garden at the time. And the ayahuasca, to me, was not a main focus, I will say, of the expedition. It was part and parcel of a whole range of substances that were available and that we could access to expand our consciousness and actually to achieve, I'd say, the type of empathy that I achieved with the rainforest, and work together with the Indians, with the shaman, in preserving these substances, these chemicals, these plants that produce these substances. Be they psychoactive or not. There's both the psychoactive style, if you will, of healing and the actual physical. And I remember talking with one of the shaman, and he said, well, we need some of your Western Norte Americano medicines because they work faster. And we had a chance to share and work with them. So this whole phenomenon of the ayahuasca tourism and people flooding now the Peruvian Amazon, the Brazilian Amazon, it just didn't really exist at that time. And now, did we contribute to that? Well, eventually, I mean, knowledge goes out. Others, in this sense, maybe Terence especially, Terence McKenna had more to do with spreading that and opening up people's consciousness and mindset to the potentiality there. This wasn't, of course, their first experience in the Amazon. Um, and one of the things, well, I'm not sure. I don't want to get off your point too much because we've got a lot we can cover here.
Mm-hmm.
So that just wasn't there at the time. So all of this would be looking in retrospect
Right, right.
at what's happened. At the time, we were the third laboratory-equipped ship to go up the Amazon. So at that time, it was very much a matter of how can we work with the Indians to preserve this knowledge. One of the real threats I discovered, in fact, maybe the major discovery from being in the Amazon, besides we did discover some new species, but what we learned was that the knowledge that had been acquired by the Indians, the indigenous Indians of the Amazon, was disappearing with the death of one shaman. His life's knowledge would be lost because the young people were not necessarily interested in following in their fathers, in most cases, but mothers as well, footsteps, and studying the plant lore. They wanted to go to the big cities. They wanted the accoutrements, that money would bring. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, we did find a young man who was a very accomplished shaman, and he had worked with his father, who had died recently. So there was a joint effort to preserve this knowledge. Mark Plotkin also started a program years later where plants that did result in the development of some new drug, money from that drug development would go back to the local indigenous people who had exposed them, introduced them to those particular plants. But then the ayahuasca tourism really took it all in a different direction, but not a direction that was totally different from what was going on at that time in America and Western Europe and Eastern Europe, for that matter, basically all over the world, mm-hmm. Of this new consciousness that was coming out, opening up due to psychoactive substances. So you had a whole historical trend. Not sure if that's...
Yeah, I mean that definitely gets to sort of what I'm asking, and I also I recognize there's the intention, right? There's the desired outcome. There's a degree of that desired outcome being accomplished, and then there's also unintended consequences, and then there's a feedback loop of how those unintended consequences change the context of the place and the intention and the desired outcomes in a feedback loop that eventually becomes where we are. And that in that, there's a lot of damage that has been done on some level, but on another level, it's damage that was already happening in some way or form on another level. I mean, it's not like people going down to the Amazon for ayahuasca is the first time any Western people have gone into the Amazon to extract resources in some way or another from the indigenous people there by any means. But there's also something really positive that's come of that, in the sense that it's I feel like there's a lot of people who are a lot more aware of the fact that the Amazon is a place worth saving because of people who otherwise wouldn't know or wouldn't care because of the type of experiences they've had on ayahuasca, which of course is in and of itself something that's quite important for more people to be on board with. So I just I think I just wanted to explore that, and I'm wondering in the sense of where are you with all of that as someone who was there in the early days and has also watched things unfold. So I think the answer that you gave me really definitely points exactly at what I was wondering about.
Well, and to expand on that point and bring it more up to date, last year we had in the end of May, beginning of June in Girona in Spain, the third World Ayahuasca Conference, where Dennis and Wade both presented, I presented, and a number of other researchers. Really fantastic meeting of a couple thousand people in Girona. one of the things that became very clear and was discussed there a lot was aspects of this ayahuasca tourism and what was happening to people. As you know, there's a lot of exploitation of Norte Americanos and Europeans and all coming down to the Amazon now because, some people do engage in that type of exploitation, and that's happened with shaman, or what I say self-anointed shaman, and not really shaman. And people lack experience, they lack knowledge. There's a lot of, there was two women who are running a very good network in Iquitos now that helps to inform people of shaman that are not reliable and not trustworthy, because especially a lot of women being taken advantage of.
Are you talking about Bia Labate and there's a couple women that were working through the Chacruna Institute who are putting out guidelines to help women safely explore indigenous ayahuasca sort of retreat centers in Peru and stuff like that? Are those the women that you're talking about?
I believe so.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The names ring a bell now. I think they spoke at the conference, and then I've encountered people who come away. I've had visions of God, and I've become God. All kinds of crazy things that happen to people, as well as the exploitation. And so I was looking at that situation, and this was a couple of years prior, hearing people's stories, kind of getting updated in a very direct way from what was happening. Also, I recently heard about a woman who was put under a spell, and she's one of many. She wrote a book, which I haven't read yet, but one of my associates said really describes the process, called The Spell. So all types of exploitation. And I said, well, we didn't have this happening in the early days. So what was the difference? And what occurred to me, anyway, in examining my own experience and the experience of others, for example, some of the early pioneers, take Leary, Albert, Ralph Metzner, so on, was that we did have this explorer's mindset. And so we didn't fall victim, if you will, to either these inner phenomena or external phenomena. Say the external being a shaman who's exploiting you for whatever it is, money, sex, whatever, power, nor to the inner, demons that might make you think you've become something that you haven't, or, people go through these experiences just like somebody goes to Burning Man and suddenly turns their life upside down. Because of some experience. So that's what drove home to me the value and the desire to share this mindset with others, that to adopt the persona, the mindset of an explorer, so that you maintain a critical mind while still having these experiences. And I'm not sure again if that's addressing your point.
We're definitely. I mean, we're in the thick of it. Like there's something in the middle between us that we're sort of exploring, and I'm sort of asking you, like, I'm seeing this facet. How are you perceiving this facet of the thing in the middle that is emerging between us? And we're back and forth, and it's growing and expanding in complexity, and I think it's great. So. Something else that's coming up now is I mean, we have pre-talked about this particular topic maybe being saved more till the end, but we're on it now, so we can kind of explore it a bit more, which is, oh no, why, it's just gone. It's like,
well, while we wait for it to come back.
Yeah, I actually, in our short little break there, I kind of remembered what it was I was going towards, and it was something that was being saved more towards the end, which is, how I mean, you're talking about how like external complications, internal complications, and the external complications might look something like, instead of having the mindset of an explorer, I have the mindset of like a spiritual seeker looking for healing, and then I can get wrapped up into allowing, or either allowing for my internal authority, my inner authority, to be hijacked by someone of ill intent, or have my actively and willingly just give away all my internal authority to someone else, and then creating a type of spiritual hierarchy that jeopardizes my ability to make self-responsible decisions around how I conduct myself, and what types of investments I'm making with my time, money, body, etc., which would be like an external thing. And then internal would be, and then this is something we talked about around like a mystical standpoint, and then to get confused because even though we're going in with this mystical sort of like mystics mindset, still not being able to really integrate those mystical type experiences into our lives in ways that allow us to show up more fully as ourselves in the world, but instead we get lost in these sort of like egoic constructs made from non-egoic states, and we start to believe like I am God, or I am Jesus, or the reincarnation of whatever. We go into these sort of like these delusions of grandeur, these messianic level delusions of grandeur and stuff. Is that kind of what you were talking about insofar as the types of things that are sort of mitigated when we enter into our psychedelic experiences with a more of an explorer's mindset?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, and you've sort of elucidated that quite well. And it ties in with something that I actually had thought I wanted to bring in,
Mm-hmm.
which is that we're in the time of the coronavirus.
Yeah, totally. I mean, ayahuasca tourism is all but stopped currently, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that, number one, we can't ignore anyway.
Of
I mean,
course, yeah.
I'm sitting here in Essaouira, Morocco, where I was here for a period of time before my flight was going. The borders were shut. They're still shut. And, so I've had to deal with that situation. A few weeks ago, we had a Zoom conference with some explorers set up by the Explorers Club, which I'm a fellow and former board member. And Bertrand Piccard went through what I thought was a really valuable analysis of the situation. The theme of the Zoom session was exploring in isolation, stimulated by the coronavirus situation, of which most of us are in lockdown now, perhaps opening up for better or worse. Mm-hmm. And he brought up the point that a lot of people look at this, experience it as a crisis, and that people naturally resist change. That seems to be for most people anyway. But he made the point that if you accept that situation, if you accept the changes that are occurring in life, in your life, that then you can take on this mindset of an explorer. It becomes then an exploration for you. You don't feel like, in fact, in reality, you're no longer a victim. And you haven't just given up your ability to deal with the situation, both innerly and outerly, to external circumstances, in this case, coming from a virus, and the ayahuasca tourism coming either from some inner, motivation or place that you got to where you think you're God, like you say, mm-hmm. or you have some unscrupulous shaman taking advantage of you. And so I thought that was actually a very good analogy. And one that ties into what's now becoming a near universal experience around the globe, that a crisis, you can have an inner crisis or an external crisis, but if you accept that situation and begin to deal with it and face it and look for solutions, because as explorers, we look for solutions. Uh, we know we're going into dangerous territory, and we look for how to deal with that. Uh, you may or may not be hearing in the background the call to prayer, because I am in a Muslim country, and if you can hear it, we can pause. If not, we'll go on.
Well, actually, this is interesting. So sorry to the listeners because I'm going to take a little creative, curative control here and say, actually,
Sure.
Rio, why don't you just go step over and can you open a window so we can hear it a little bit better?
Oh,
You can
yeah.
leave your computer where it is, but just open the
Oh,
window and see if
okay.
we can hear it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely audible. So how many times a day do they play this?
This happens 5 times a day.
Hmm.
Usually once seems late morning, about this time in the afternoon. We'll hear it in a couple hours, and then in the evening, and we'll hear it again early in the morning.
Hmm.
And sometimes I wake up for it, sometimes I don't. But what we've been doing is, my partner and I, we use it as a moment to reflect and kind of come to a pause. Uh, so we've integrated it into our lives in that sense.
Hmm.
If I can take a pause, I'm going to close the windows again because the
Yes.
wind's a
Yeah,
little bit
totally.
blowing.
Please do close them now. Yeah.
But that does bring me to a point that I did want to mention in the context of what we were just discussing.
Yes, please.
In this time of the coronavirus, um, that I think doing psychedelics is something that one should take maybe a little more seriously, uh, with that consideration of being in this situation. Um, Probably most everyone, reads at some level the news that comes out constantly now,
Hmm.
uh, and it can't help but have an effect. Uh, if you're part of humanity, you feel what's going on in a very deep way. And so I think that that's something that if you're looking at doing psychedelics at this time, that you really have to consider. That's part of the setting
Hmm.
in this sense, and also your own mindset in relation to that, because it's changed all of our lives in one way or another, in some more, some less, of course,
Yeah.
depending on your circumstances.
Yeah, that's actually something that was really relevant for myself and my partner going into a lockdown, quasi lockdown kind of situation. The government wasn't locking us down explicitly, but we were kind of choosing to navigate a bunch of complexities around who's been where with who at what times, where do the Titanic walls come up with the hopes that it doesn't resolve the same way the Titanic did. Um, but we were talking about our own explorations in our relationship. We ended up canceling an MDMA experience that we had planned, which we do multiple times a year for intimacy and connection and resolution and stuff. Um, because we're like, well, it probably doesn't make sense to do anything that might jeopardize our immune systems right now. From a psychological context, I mean, I wouldn't be worried about being afraid of coronavirus on MDMA by any means. I'm not afraid of anything on MDMA. I'm just like, bring on life. I love it. But in the context of like, okay, well, we still have to go to grocery stores and all the rest. And this was early on, so we had no sense of how dangerous it really was where we are, except that the potential danger could be very high. right? And then also even during a more psychedelic journey not that long ago, there was the curiosity of like, I wonder what it's like to be on psychedelics during the pandemic, because neither of us had done that. And it was interesting because we were very conscientious about what that might mean. And, like normally there's a decision to have a sober friend we can call,
Yes,
but there was no
right.
sober friend that we could call that wouldn't break the sort of like pod agreements that we have, the safety pod agreements that we had. So we had to even navigate around how would we have a safe friend show up to support us if needed, without actually coming into any contact physically with that person. So it's like all these different things that need to be navigated. I mean, in the long run, coronavirus did not exist in any sense whatsoever until we decided to go outside and saw other people and was like, oh yeah, it's a pandemic. Yeah, it's like seeing other people on the street on this beautiful day, and normally in springtime it's like everyone's smiling like, oh hi, isn't it just so beautiful out? But actually like every person we saw was all like kind of like curled up and being like, is this person going to come too close to me? And like it was weird. But anyways, I slightly diverge, but something that came up for me as you were talking about it, which really, and please correct me if I'm misunderstanding, sounds like a sort of like a quintessential sort of difference, that might be there for like in choosing the explorer's mindset insofar as the coronavirus. So, let's just say it's a crisis. Let's just say it's a crisis. We receive it as a crisis. And yet an explorer's mindset might say, well, this isn't a crisis. This is an opportunity. This is an opportunity to learn. This is an opportunity to explore. This is something brand new that has never been experienced before. This is something exciting. This is something, even with all the dangers involved and the very undeniable truth of death and grief and suffering, pain, and all the rest of that, it's still an opportunity. Even when it becomes a crisis, it's still an opportunity. So is that kind of like, am I kind of getting a sense of the thing?
Oh, yeah, I think you've really hit the nail on the head. In fact, my partner and I had various conversations about this as we dealt with the situation of suddenly we were in lockdown. The country locked itself down. We had a few days to evaluate the situation. We looked at photographs of what was going on in the airports, the whole situation. And this was when we didn't have a lot of understanding of the virus, or at least not as much as we have now. And we said, this doesn't look safe. And on the other hand, hey, we're now stuck here, if you want to use those words. And we said, my God, this is a huge opportunity. In our case, we love this country, Morocco. It's filled with heart-centered people who are just fantastic. Right from the beginning, the country took a very intelligent approach to dealing with the virus, and studied what was happening in other countries and integrated that experience. And we said, this is a huge opportunity. Here we are, we get to explore in a very deep way a culture that we're now making lots of friends, local friends. We go out on the street, everybody's wearing masks, but suddenly we've opened up a little bit. And people are happy, they're out. It's become for us really a life-changing experience, there's no question. But if we hadn't taken on that mindset of exploration and said, this is an opportunity, accept the crisis that was happening. We read what's going on in the States, where we're from, so we have the most connection with horror to a certain extent, and empathy. But for us, yeah, it's a huge opportunity. And I think, I experienced that in my exploration. I had a survival voyage, a 36-day survival voyage on my next expedition when I circumnavigated the world with a small crew. We had 7 at that time. And somehow I just came on to that as an opportunity. Here, you know, sure, I could have gone into my bunk and worried about whether I was going to survive or not, but that wasn't the approach. That wasn't the mindset. Because the explorer takes these things on, accepts that situation, and rather than going down as a crisis innerly and externally, you take action and see it as an opportunity for both inner and outer exploration. I must say it's been fantastic. I mean, for me, I'm finding not only a new inner liberation, and but an external one as a chance to deeply explore a new culture. So yeah, I think you've hit it right on hit the nail on the head there with your perception of it.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, all I found how all I found is a very intimate understanding of my abilities to drop into gaming compulsion. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kind of just kidding. I've learned more than that, but I definitely learned that. And I kind of I want to walk away a bit from talking about coronavirus because I'm
Sure.
glad we touched on it, but I mean, oh my God, as if we need any more news or discussion about coronavirus in our lives at this point, right?
Right.
But I want to move away from that, having, consciously, pointed to the situation I'm in with the virus, and the situation you're in with the virus. We're both very fortunate and quite privileged for us to
Yes.
have a context that was comparatively easier to lean into curiosity and explore, where for other
Yeah.
people, due to a variety of possible variables, some of which are acute, some of which, systemic and oppression based, politically based, historically
Mhm.
based, that make leaning into the explorer's mindset a little bit more out of crisis, a little bit more difficult, or dramatically more difficult. And with a sensitivity and awareness of the the fortune and the fortunateness and privilege that we both happen to have, both acutely and presently, to have an opportunity for it to you to be in this beautiful place where the country handled it pretty well, and for me to be in a beautiful place where the country sort of handled it all right, but it wasn't so bad in my city anyways, slash we'll see economically in a year. But that's not the case for a lot of people around the world, and just want to be aware of that and speak
Absolutely.
to it before we let the coronavirus thing go.
Yes. No, as you've enunciated, it's quite true.
Mm-hmm.
We are fortunate. We are lucky. And it's a situation that's affected us all, some better, some worse. Yeah.
Yeah. So, having said that, leaning away, I'm thinking about Bill Richards. Oh man, the name of his book is totally escaping me. I'm looking for it on my Sacred Knowledge. So Bill Richards, Sacred Knowledge, and I think I got this from him about his work with psilocybin assisted therapies over the years. One of the at this point, like the grandfathers of psilocybin assisted therapy in the modern world. And I think it's his premise around like it's surrender, surrender, surrender. But if you can't surrender, then it's curiosity. And so if something is too big to surrender to, getting curious with it can have the same sort of like outcome in some way. And so I'm leaning into that when I'm hearing you talk about being an explorer, because yeah, you're in it, but then when all of a sudden it could be a crisis, but at that point you're like, oh, but now I've got the curiosity comes on board, and it becomes an opportunity, where that sort of like sense of agency and inner authority isn't lost beyond, the inevitable result of losing it as a consequence of your entire ego disintegrating and your sense of self dying into the one or something like that. But yeah, so I'm thinking about that, and I have something else I want to ask you about. But first, I want to give you an opportunity to comment on what I just said there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess when you're using the word surrender, and I've not read his book, I would pick the word acceptance that I was using earlier, because to my mind, and maybe he meant the same thing. As I say, I don't know.
I think it is kind of the same. same
Yeah.
vein, yeah.
That by accepting it, you can deal with it. If you deny it, if you fight it, then you have a problem. Just like when you're in a psychedelic state, or you're especially coming into a psychedelic state, a lot of people have resistances come up. And we usually say, well, keep breathing. Breathe your way through it, which means, you accept what's coming in. You work, especially, I've found to be effective, and others will, I'm sure, make the same comment, to keep breathing and work through that. So I guess you could look at it as surrender, but I find acceptance is maybe a little more active, because you accept it and then you start working with it, rather than just saying, okay, I surrender,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That. So I'm not sure if that
Yeah,
gets at what you were
I
going
think
at.
that is what I'm going for. When I wrote a whole book that goes very deep into what I mean by surrender, and it's very much like, it's more about acceptance. Of course, I mean, we say surrender, it comes with a very adversarial type tone, like submission and whatever else. But I mean it very from from a complete and total acceptance of what is.
Okay.
Like full surrender. I have like the embodiment of it feels to me like a laying back, arms open, like, okay, this is it. So then what is this? I'm here. I fully accept. I surrender. I no longer am fighting against this. So it's like there's in the surrender is acceptance, but it in it is this sense of like recognizing that up until that point of surrender, I was adversarial with what was coming on, which was not serving me. And so instead I surrender to what is, in a way that's generative rather than as it's generally represented in our society, which is a very sort of like finite game, winner, loser sort of thing, that it's adversarial. So surrender is defeat in a way that means that I'm just recently getting into this guy Carson, his finite infinite game stuff. It's like, so when you surrender, when you defeat, you lose your life, you lose your death, you lose the role, you lose immortality, you lose the point of it all, kind of thing. Where this is not that kind of surrender. It's more like a type of surrender that accepts and welcomes life rather than gives up the opportunity to win it in an adversarial game. So that said, the next thing I want to ask you about is this. One of the ways in which I have over the years engaged, especially with psilocybin, my relationship with LSD is much more expedition, exploratory, explicit. It's like, yeah, I'm taking this. I'm just curious what's going to happen. Like, where are we going to go? Where with psilocybin, I really have I have a relationship that's very personified. I have be it just a model in my mind or not, like I have a sense of being in a lived communion with an intelligence that is beyond human design, and that intelligence is of the mushroom, and that I'm a student of that intelligence. It is the teacher. It is an ambiguous teacher, and it is not a teacher by any means that the lessons are served by verbatim acceptance. But it's like there's some learning that has to happen in order for it to end up being really valuable. But I'm wondering, like, as I'm listening to you, I'm wondering, like, if this teacher-student model that I have is also in alignment with exploration, because it's exploration from a knowledge standpoint. And I'm just curious if you could, like, does that fit, or am I missing something in this student teacher kind of perspective?
Well, I also treat mushrooms very much like that, where I allow the mushroom to say, kind of lead me. What are you going to show me today? As opposed to, say, acid, which have much more of a, okay, I've got my microscope here, I've got my telescope, and let's go out and explore.
Right.
So, and looking at it, and a lot of people use this analogy of the teacher plants, and certainly there is a very big reality to that. Can we look at In a way, yes, I think so. I think so that maybe you can even say one of the purposes of exploration, maybe not always traditionally. Sir Richard Burton, to me, is sort of the quintessential explorer because he combined both the external, let's say, looking for the source of the Nile, with the inner, where he, translated the Thousand and One Nights, the Arabian Nights, and got deeply into the cultures. He had skills in language that are probably completely unique, that he could so quickly and easily learn 28, I think it was. I might be wrong on the
Wow.
number, 23, 28, whatever it was, languages. Um, so, in that sense, yes, I think you can make that analogy. And again, it goes back to this point of not resisting, not fighting, but accepting, and then listening and taking it in, processing it. And then how does that fit into what is my goal? What am I, what am I doing here? Even if my goal is simply to let's see what's out there. I
Mm-hmm.
don't have a map. I know there's territory out there, but I
Yeah.
don't have a map.
Dead reckoning,
So
right?
I
Isn't that what it is? Like you only know where you are based on where you've come from?
where you've been.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think yeah, you could use that analogy as well.
Hmm.
Not, I don't think it goes quite as far as the exploration paradigm, but I think it definitely gets you into the territory, if you will.
Cool. I mean, we're dipping a bit low on time here, and
Okay.
depending on like I have some extra time if you do,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
there's two things that I want to give space for.
Okay.
The first one is to give you an opportunity to finish your expedition story, which we paused about 15 minutes into the interview. And because I know you have some more photos, which of course people will already have been told to watch this one in video rather than just audio if they have the opportunity. And also because depending on time, one of the things that you ended up exploring at one point was even datura, which is a curious and understandably underexperienced psychoactive or psychedelic or deliriant, I guess is more accurate, in the psychedelic culture. So, and then the next one is just like what needs else to be said for us to understand your explorer's mindset before we close out the interview. Um, and so, yeah, give us the rest of your story here for your second expedition, the circumnavigating the world.
Okay, so the circumnavigation expedition turned out to be, though it wasn't planned that way, to be a 3 and a third year circumnavigation expedition. Uh, One of the main projects on that expedition was the filming of a cultural documentary series called Journeys to Other Worlds. And you can see a photo here of myself with a 16 millimeter uh, blimped Aeroflex camera. I think this was shot in Yemen. Uh, and here you see me in the Choco outside of Panama being painted with the Geneva dye. So we'll go through a little bit of this and then I'll talk about datura specifically. Here I'm recording a shaman who is blind in his tent, well, not tent really, his thatch roof home that's raised up, and with people who are waiting for his treatment. And he told me that he sees the disease as like a small animal and he sucks the animal out of the body. Uh, Now, to get to the datura, here you'll see a photo of myself with Swami Dharam Jyoti, and we're holding a black and white photo. We're holding the Explorers Club flag. So I got to know Swami in Kathmandu, Nepal, where, again, I was involved in the building of a hotel an explorers hotel that my associates and I did that incorporated really East-West. And we had an East-West library there, and Swami, who was a Hindu Swami, was in charge of the library, and we got to know each other. He himself had a unique practice of datura. I wrote an article that, if you want to reference it, Swami's Sacred Plant, that was published in the Entheogen Review in Volume 12, Number 1, 2003, Vernal Equinox issue. And he had a unique practice of oral datura use. He started that when he was a young boy. The story is that some other swamis came to his mother and said, "Listen, this boy has potential. If you'll give him to us, we will train him and educate him, and or he can stay home and just become like everybody else." So she gave him up, and off he went. And for me, that was, I'd say, in many ways more, I'm not going to say for me it was terrifying, but I was more concerned in some ways than I was with ayahuasca. I mean, Dr. Schultes himself had told me he never touched datura. When I was driving with a botanist in Colombia, his wife was in the car, and I had picked a couple of datura flowers, and the scent, just from me having them in the car, made her so delirious that we had to throw them out.
Wow.
And I recall walking out of Swami's apartment one evening after we had taken datura, and this is an oral mixture of datura taken as in the beetle that they chew in the subcontinent. And I was walking, and the next thing I knew, I was picking myself up off the ground. I had, just lost all consciousness and body control. And then I picked myself up. I was there again and moved on and was doing fine. But, datura, rightly so, needs to be approached very cautiously. And I'll just say, in case somebody says, well, I'm going to go out there and try it. The way that I recommend, and my experience with it, is to smoke a bit of it, usually with some cannabis, and just watch yourself as you go, slow and small amounts. Taking it orally, say in a tea or something, is very dangerous because just like with cannabis itself, when you take it orally, the effects may take a long time to come on. You don't know how strong it's going to be unless you're experienced with that particular preparation. So that's one way to approach it. And in fact, I gave a talk at the 2017 International Transpersonal Conference in Prague on the potential of datura as a therapeutic substance, because it lasts short lasting. If you smoke it, maybe it'll last an hour or something, and you can titrate the amount you're taking in so you can control the effect pretty accurately.
Just to check in quickly, because we're saying datura, but there are multiple plants that we can call datura, right? And you're talking specifically about the Bergmansia, like the angel's trumpet.
Well, Brugmansia is usually refers to the tree datura,
right?
Whereas datura usually refers to the bush datura,
which is what they call. Is that the one that they call toei in the Amazon? Is that the same plant?
I'm not familiar with that term, but I'm not going to say that it isn't.
Okay.
Yeah, could be. I'm more familiar with its use in India and in Nepal through my work with Swami. And
okay.
Let's see. We were going to go on the expedition. I'm going to bring up those that I did around the world. Did involve much more of a cultural study, as it turned out, of delving into various tropical cultures. And again, we use the vessel, the Heraclitus. Talk about that for a moment. I'm actually looking here at a photograph that happened after the Girona conference. We made a visit to the ship, which is going through a complete reconstruction in Roses, Spain at the moment. Of course, the work has stopped because of the coronavirus. And you'll see in the picture here, going from my left, Wade Davis, Dennis McKenna, myself, and Sir Gillian Prance, who was also one of my mentors for the Amazon expedition. At the time, he was head of the Department of Botany at the New York Botanical Garden before he went on to become the head of Kew Gardens. And of course, he's now retired. So that brought together us for the first time. Terence, or Dennis rather, Terence was of course not with us, and Wade and I, since we had been in the Amazon at the Heraclitus, we'd been together many times since then, but never at the ship. So that was some of the photos that I did want to share with you. And I'll send those along.
Great. Yeah. And again, for the listeners, if you are just listening on audio, go check out the video. I'll have put all those photos in to see it. So then, yeah, so that's, now we're kind of done sharing your photos, talking about that second expedition. We touched on the datura. And I think we talked about basically, all the things we had intended to talk about insofar as your explorer's mindset and some of the things it enables and some of the things it protects from. And so now I'm curious, is there anything else you feel, that wasn't addressed that you want to talk about insofar as the explorer's mindset, or even maybe to summarize it in a way that allows people to understand it a little bit better, or carry it a little bit more fully from this interview?
Well, I am working on a book currently called Sailing the Psychedelic Seas, which came from a panel that I started at the Berlin Altered Conference in 2017, and I've now done twice at Burning Man. And the idea of that was we had the audience ask questions of a panel of experienced psychonauts. And my point, you might say, in doing that was to allow people to begin to, in an interactive way, get a feel for this explorer's mindset. Because when I began looking at it, it took me back to the very beginning, where the psychedelic experience was a key book that a lot of us in the early days used. And if you look at many, I think, of the early explorers of the world of psychedelic substances, from Gordon Wasson to Schultes to Hoffman, so on, they all had that mindset. And unfortunately, it isn't something, you go to school and I'm going to study exploration. Well, that doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. Just not part of, you might say, the mindset that we have in the West for the Occidental mind. And maybe if we applied Albert Hoffman's point of view, which he said LSD is the medicine par excellence for the Occidental mind, we would have that. And I think that ties in with the way the Amazonian shaman themselves found these substances. They'll tell you that, well, the substance led me to it, or I saw it under that state. But when you walk through the forest with them, they're constantly, say, grabbing a leaf and smelling it and saying, oh, that particular chemical. So they're exploring the forest. They're out there examining their world and learning about it. So it's a different kind of approach than we've taken in the West, especially, European, now West American, but just in general Western mindset, following the Freud, Jung, all of that type of psychology, as opposed to more of an experiential and beyond the ego type of exploration of my inner and outer environment. Um, so I feel that can become, in a way, like a philosopher's stone for you. If you can find that place inside of yourself where you have that explorer's mindset, the curiosity, the acceptance of the situation, the understanding of it, in many ways also the surrender to it. But I think, again, acceptance and then going out from there. Okay, that's my situation now. What can I discover here? What's the opportunity, as you brought up, to both increase my understanding of my world, my understanding of the people around me, my local culture, because culture is like the water for the fish. It's where we as humans swim. It's where we as humans live, as well as, in the bigger sense, as Homo sapiens, in the biosphere, and understanding that we're actually part of that, and that these substances are part of it. And perhaps, it's a theory that some people hold, that human consciousness developed under the influence of psychedelic substances when the early man came in contact with them. It's a theory, so we don't know. But it seems to me that that's a basic human instinct, that what we call one of the goals or aims of the Explorers Club, one of our raison d'etre, is to keep alive the spirit of exploration. I think that that's one of the things that makes us human. And so to keep hold of that, when you're in or under the influence of a psychoactive substance, and in particular psychedelics, where you can go through a total ego disintegration, if you will, and still be there, but actually be there in a more full sense than you could ever be through a simple ego or personality structure. To be there in a very essential way where you have an organic connection to your environment, you have that connection and experience that you're in innerly. So I think that this can be very valuable, and that's why I've tried to communicate it, and I hope more successfully than not. And that's one of the things that I'm looking at I'm grappling with in this new book, which I hope will present it in a much fuller way. And I took the analogy of sailing, because I have that experience as a sailor, as a sea captain, as an explorer. And I think it's truly applicable to the situation of exploration, if you will, of the psychedelic substances, which have the ability to allow us to enter other worlds that are not normally accessible to us.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for putting that in such a beautiful package for us. Now, to close out, I'd love to get some details about how, us, the listeners, can find out more about your work, stay up to date with when your book comes out. And also, from what I understand, you also have been a part of something called the Biosphere 2 project that you wanted to talk about as well. So this is the opportunity to drop the follow-up links and content for listeners.
Oh, okay, great. So my website, which I have to say is terribly out of date, seems like life moves on beyond websites, but riohahn.com. And I hope that you can put some of these up as slides, but riohahn.com. The Spaceship Earth documentary that just came out, done by Radical Media and being distributed by Neon, is available on iTunes. And also we can put up a link in your slides. It'll show how people can access that. And that does touch on some of our early work, and then, of course, focuses on the Biosphere 2 project, which I also treated as an exploration experience, and did an article in the Explorers Journal on that. We actually, I got the Explorers flag for the first 2-year closure. The Sailing the Psychedelic Seas book, which if people are interested, they certainly can shoot me an email and say, put me on the mailing list at riohahn@gmail.com. See, I'll just take a quick look at my notes.
Yeah.
Else. So again, some of the books I mentioned earlier, where in particular They Live to Tell the Tale, true stories of modern adventure from the legendary Explorers Club, where I have the Elixir of the Spirit chapter, Swami's Sacred Plant, which is about the datura, that can be found on my website under publications. I think those are probably the big things.
Well, and, I'll make sure that for the listeners, all of those things are available on the show notes. Like those links will all be listed on the show notes as well, so you don't have to use your brain to memorize everything that was just said. Okay. You just head over to the show notes of this episode, and it'll all be there for you to check out Rio stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, James, I truly appreciate being invited on to your podcast. And it's been a pleasure. I'm really interested getting to know you and hearing your perceptions and ability to very accurately and perceptively formulate what are, by their very nature, difficult concepts. But to me, this world of experiential science, if you will, is key to our personal development. I think that one of the main uses of psychedelics is personal development. I think that our future in many ways will be determined by how conscious we can become, both as individuals and as various cultures and societies around the world. And as much as the coronavirus, of course, is right now our major concern, the really greater situation is the situation of the biosphere. And our tackling of that. In many ways, people are looking at, and I think also there's arguments for it, that the spread of the coronavirus, the jumping of that virus into the human species, is a result of the way we've been handling things in the biosphere. And the idea, to go maybe back to Biosphere 2, the biosphere around the planet we called Biosphere 1. So Biosphere 2 was the first materially closed but information and energetically open system capable of supporting human life. And we had two basic purposes in doing that. One was to gain a better understanding of how Biosphere 1 works so that we could be better stewards, better participants, better members of the biosphere. Because I think it takes a certain change in our perception to understand that we are part of the biosphere. The biosphere is our home. The biosphere is what allows us to live. It's the water, if we were fish, that we're swimming in. It's our life source. It's where we come from, is this biosphere. And two, to develop other biospheres that we could use for travel into space, for habitation on other planets. But number one, of course, is where we are and how to take care of this biosphere. And to my mind, also, that spirit of exploration is tied into that in our understanding of the biosphere in order to keep Homo sapiens, humanity, alive. Because as we all know, we're under not just the risk of things like coronavirus, but an asteroid could take humanity out, very quickly, actually. And I think that there is something in our DNA, we want to proliferate, we want to live, we want to carry on. We all, want to feel that there is a future for humanity, and that psychedelic substances are perhaps, well, it's one of, if not perhaps one of the key, if not the key tool to really sustaining our future, because of the ability we have when we properly use these substances. And to my mind, again, using an explorer mindset gives us access to that realm of experience, that realm of understanding, that will enable us both individually and on the bigger scale to have a positive and vibrant and sustainable future.
Yeah, I mean, Rio, I love your closing thoughts there too, and really looking at exploration from a standpoint of understanding and nourishment, and deepening right relationship with biosphere, rather than currently our modus operandi for exploring the wilds is for exploitation and extraction. So yeah, I appreciate your closing thoughts there on how to bring that explorer's mindset into the very pragmatic sort of group project we have as the people who are alive at this time, which is to do our absolute best to try to support the systems that are towards being systems that could be much better for the planet and much better for the continuation of all life in the biosphere, including our own, but not just exclusively our own, which is kind of the direction we're heading towards, to the inevitable result of not even our own. Excuse me. And also earlier on in your comments there, thank you very much for your compliments. And it has been excellent having you on the show as well. Great to talk with you and to get to know you over the last little while as we've prepared for this, and wishing you a wonderful rest of your opportunity there in Morocco. And
thank you.
Thanks again for being on the show.
Oh, thank you. And we're happy to do it again.
Great.
Take care and stay safe.
Yeah, you too. And cut.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for tuning in. Please follow up with Rio's work. He's an interesting, curious guy, and I'm really looking forward to reading his book, Sailing the Psychedelic Seeds, when it comes out. If you are interested in supporting the show, doing so through Patreon is great. You basically pledge a certain amount of money each month. Based on the amount that you pledge, there are some insider opportunities that will come up, perks to being a patron, but anything that you want to give is deeply appreciated, and having that inside of the pool of contribution each month gives me a reliable and steady sense of what I have to invest in the work and the means to produce this show for everyone. Alternatively, you can leave a one-time PayPal donation. Also, I haven't mentioned it in a while, but I still have a very limited number of these, as you can see on the YouTube video, Adventures to the Mind LSD blotter paper. Well, LSD blotter paper. There's no LSD on here. I'm sorry. It is undipped, as they say. And you could also support the show by buying one of those. So also you could support your having rad psychedelic art. Also an option. So yeah, becoming a patron, PayPal donation, buying a piece of blotter art on the shop at jameswjesso.com, all great ways to support the show, as well as sending something out to your friends and fam if you felt like you found some value in this episode. That's it for now. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you on the next episode of Adventures Through the Mind. Take care.